Hello, this is Zahir Lalum. Welcome you all on Frankly Speaking. My guest today is Mr. Jose Ugas, Chair, Transparency International. Jose Ugas is a Peruvian jurist, professor of criminal law and anti-corruption activist, and he was elected on 19th October 2014 as chair of the International Board of Directors of Transparency International, the global anti-corruption organization working in more than 100 countries. He served as ad hoc attorney of Peru for the highest profile criminal cases in recent Peruvian history involving the investigation of former President Fujimori and his chief of intelligence, Vladimiro. Under his mandate, $205 million in assets were frozen abroad and 75 million were recovered. Jose Ugas served as president of Proyectica, the Peruvian chapter of Transparency International. In 2004, he became Eisenhower Fellow for the multinational program and later that year joined the Institutional Integrity Office of the World Bank from 2004 to 2006. We welcome Jose Ugas on Frankly Speaking.
How are you?
Yeah, it's good to see you and good to have you on Frankly Speaking.
Thank you very much.
We know that you are a staunch advocate against corruption and you have been relentlessly working to contain, to curb, to fight corruption all over the world, and you're representing as chair of Transparency International. So how does it look, the fight against corruption under the current scenario all over the world?
Well, as you may know, we every year deliver a perception corruption index, and since 2 years ago we have been painting the world according to the ranking on the index, and we paint of red the countries where there's a lot of corruption, a little bit less red and orange, medium corruption, and yellow, the countries with very low corruption.
Okay.
The bad news is that the world is 2/3 quite red. So there's a lot of corruption around the world. And in many cases, it is systemic corruption. Okay. So it's not an episodic situation. It's something that for historical reasons has been there for many years and is affecting the people of these countries, basically the poorest ones. And that's the problem with corruption. Corruption is striking the poorest people of our countries, and therefore that's a reason why we need to combat corruption and try to eradicate it.
But how impressive is this scenario of the progress you have so far made during over the last decade?
Well, Transparency International has 24 years of existence, and I would say that an evaluation we did some years ago when we accomplished 20 years of existence is that we had achieved several relevant goals. For example, before Transparency International appeared, corruption was not in the global agenda. It was an issue that some countries were fighting with, but in the international community, it was not politically correct to talk about corruption. Okay. Even there were institutions like the World Bank where it was forbidden to expressly mention the word corruption in their reports. Now, after 24 years of advocating against corruption, we can see with satisfaction that corruption is in the top of the agenda. Now governments, international bodies, multinational banks are considering corruption as one of the biggest and toughest problems around the world. So I think that's an achievement. The other one is that we've been working for many years in order to deliver instruments. As we have the Corruption Perception Index, we also have many other instruments like the Bribe Payers Index, the Corruption Barometer, the Report on Track, that is transparency of companies, national institutional systems, many other instruments we've been delivering in these years. And the other thing is that we have cooperated around the world in order to create international treaties to fight corruption. Now we have the United Nations Convention Against Corruption and the regional conventions, the African, the Asian, the Inter-American conventions.
How effective is the instruments are to curb or contain corruption?
Well, they are in a process to generate efficient results. For example, when we started our investigations in the Peruvian case against former President Fujimori, as you mentioned, the United Nations Convention was just starting. But the Inter-American Convention Against Corruption had some more years. And thanks to that convention, it was possible to open some criminal cases against Peruvian officials that, according to our internal law, were not considered public officials, for example. So now on asset recovery and money laundering provisions, illicit enrichment and others, I would say that these conventions are really providing the governments valuable tools in order to struggle against corruption. But at the end, the instruments and the treaties have no value if there is no political will. Okay. So that in the center of the struggle against corruption, what we have to have clear is that if there is no political will, very little will be achieved.
Do you see a good degree of political will around the world? I mean, for the governments, how does it look for the governments? How serious they are to fight corruption?
I would say that we have a scenario of light and shadows. What we are seeing now is grand corruption and systemic corruption in many countries, but at the same time, the people is reacting in many countries of the world. From where I come, that is Latin America, you can see what has happened in Guatemala, Honduras, and Brazil. Okay. Millions of people have gone to the streets protesting against corruption. The president of Brazil was brought down because of corruption issues.
Is that Lula?
Dilma Rousseff.
Oh, Rousseff.
And Lula is going into investigation now because apparently he had been in some irregular arrangements with private companies in order to acquire an apartment in front of the beach. Okay. In Guatemala, for months, citizens were on the streets demanding action against corruption, and now the president and the vice president are in prison. And in Honduras, also, as in Guatemala, the people went to the streets, and now very high officials are confronting courts. So there's, on one side, a significant level of corruption, and we can see the scandals around the world, Yanukovych in Ukraine, Martinelli in Panama, Obiang in Equatorial Guinea, Dos Santos in Angola, and many others, Ben Ali in Tunisia in the past. But at the same time, you have movement of the people reacting against corruption, and we haven't seen that in some decades before.
Jose, no country in the current world is absolutely out of corruption, free from corruption. But there are corruptions very pervasive, extreme corruption level. You mentioned that those are marked as red countries. But I mean, what are the challenges you are facing to make the governments or institutions, businesses to comply with the improving the corruption level in countries?
Well, I would say that the worst situation is when you have systemic corruption and at the same time corruption has been normalized by the citizens, the common citizens.
What do you mean by systemic corruption?
Systemic corruption is when it is not an episodic situation. It's not that you have a bad administration or a bad government or a bad president. Okay. It's on the structure of the society. Okay. So it doesn't care which government is coming. Okay. Corruption will remain because it's all around.
Congenital problem.
Yes. So for systemic problems, you need systemic solutions. Okay. And then you have to make a sound diagnosis and then try to solve this. Trying to change, for example, the culture of the bureaucrats. Trying to change all these or close all these gaps where corruption breeds and constantly is affecting the state. At the same time, you need to work with the citizens. Okay. Because when corruption is normalized by the people, like in many countries of Latin America, mine is one of those, and I assume that in Bangladesh is the same, people has assumed that corruption is part of their life, that they need to pay some little bribes or make some illegal arrangement just to move on.
Exactly.
And that is not true. I mean, the Peruvians are not more corrupt than the North Americans because we are Peruvians. No, we are more corrupt because we have a system that makes us more corrupt than the North Americans or the Europeans. And I think that here is the same situation. So we have to work in order to make people conscious that there is a different way of living, that it is possible, and that it is better. And then we have to work on values and education with the new generations.
Jose, we'll talk more about your objectives and missions of Transparency International. Jose, you have been speaking in different events and countries about money laundering. This is also one of the major concerns in this current scenario all over the world.
grand corruption and organized crime would not be possible if there wouldn't be institutions willing to launder that money to bring it again to the official system. And we've seen with a lot of worrisome what is happening with the financial sector. I was reviewing the list of the banks that have been sanctioned in the past decade because of money laundering, and it's just unbelievable. We are not talking about little banks in little islands. We are talking about top banks of the world. Banks from England, Germany, France, United States, of course, that have been fined with billions of dollars. One of them was caught laundering $800 billion to the Mexican cartels of the drug. Other was caught with $300 billion laundered to terrorist groups in the Middle East. And these are banks where you and me probably will have your account or my account. So something is going wrong with the financial system, and we need radical changes there.
Now, how to hold them accountable?
Well, first of all, we have to break the rule of impunity, because these people, once they are caught, they paid some fines. That money is not getting out of their pockets. The money gets out of the same banks, so they're affecting at the end the same people. But none of them have gone to prison. There's a very interesting investigation that not even one banker in the United States has been gone to prison because of money laundering. That needs to change. On our side, as civil society, I think we need to start to speak louder. We have made several approaches to the banks. We have conversation with the banks, and they said, okay, stop please mentioning us in your public statements. Said, well, we need to change the environment. We need to change the rules. But we feel that there's not really a political will to do that. There are almost 1 year since we started talking to a leading bank that said we will bring other banks to a table to sit with you and other organizations and see how can we fix that, and nothing has happened.
And still the culture of looming large, a culture of impunity looming large.
Impunity is the rule. I mean, we see every day that billions of dollars are moving around the market through the banks of these top institutions, and nothing happens.
We did experience the Panama Papers, which have been widely discussed all over the world. How the Transparency International did deal with this matter?
Well, 2 years before the Panama Papers appeared as a world scandal, we were advocating in order to establish a global registry of these opaque companies in order to know who are the ultimate beneficiaries of these corporate vehicles. Studies that have been done by the OECD and the World Bank show that most of the cases of organized crime and corruption or tax evasion go through corporate vehicles, more than 70% in some cases. So that is a big problem for money laundering, because when you can buy a company with $500 and hide your identity and put someone else in front, you can move billions of dollars and nobody will know that you are stealing money or that you are involved in corrupt practices. So Transparency International started this campaign. We successfully went to the G20 on December of 2015, and the G20 Assembly adopted the principles we were proposing. So now some countries are already working on this global registry. We have Denmark, Norway, and the United Kingdom that have already established these registries. I was in the London Summit of Anti-Corruption that was convened by the former Prime Minister Cameron, and 12 countries there committed to work on this global registry. So we believe that these offshore secret companies must disappear. There is no reason not to be transparent on who are the real owners of these accounts or these companies, because it's the only way to know who is moving the money and where is that money coming from. So we are still in a campaign in order to eradicate and bring light to this. Look, what happened with the Panama Papers is just amazing. It's one law firm of one country. Yeah. And it opened 11.5 million documents that were related to thousands of people, among them 75 heads of states or leaders of states. You can imagine what would happen if we open all the registries of all the law firms in all the offshore countries.
Yeah.
That would be just...
That will make a havoc.
Yes.
But you got Corruption Perception Index to release every year. But there are some controversy in different countries, even in our country too. So how credible is the process are? How would you defend the process of preparing or making Corruption Perception Index?
First of all, it's natural that when you release an index and you are not in a good position or in a good picture, you are angry with that.
Yes.
And you say, this has no value, this is perception, this is not technically sound, this is not scientific.
Yeah.
What I can say, and what we believe in Transparency International, is that almost in all the cases, perception is reality. If you see the list of the countries that are on the top of the most corrupt, and then you go to those countries, you'll find that it is true. There's systemic corruption, widespread corruption that people is complaining all the time. If you go to the Scandinavian countries that usually perform as the less corrupt around the world, Denmark, Norway, Sweden, you'll find that their own streets and system, there's very little corruption. So how is the CPI produced? How is a Corruption Perception Index produced? First of all, it's not a survey done by Transparency International. What we do is we pick at least 3 or 4 surveys from very reputed survey companies around the world, including the World Bank, the Inter-American Bank, and others, and then we apply a formula, and that brings a result. Of course, it is not 100% accurate. I'll give you an example.
Okay.
In Latin America, most of the countries are under the average of 50%, 37, 40 out of 100. But Uruguay and Chile are always performing very well. If you go better than the United States and Japan in some cases.
Okay.
If you go to Chile and Uruguay, you will find that there is truly less corruption than in many of these other countries. But you can say Uruguay is also an offshore country. They have a banking system that allows to move money. And it is true. I mean, the CPI is not intended to measure everything. It's just a perception of investors of how corruption is going on in a specific country. So I would say to the governments, don't get too concerned. Just try to do your best in order to reduce corruption in your country.
We're watching Frankly Speaking. Guest today is Chair, Transparency International, Mr. Jose Ugas. Jose, you were talking about, integrating civil society and the citizens in fighting corruption. How encouraging is the situation is in across the world?
Well, as I mentioned before, people is mobilizing against corruption, and we want to accompany these processes. And I think that TI Bangladesh, for example, our chapter here in Bangladesh has done an extraordinary work engaging with communities all around the country and mobilizing people in order to confront corruption through the different ways of organization that they have found. Now we want to do the same at a global level. And
but they got different experience. They have been acclaimed for their work, and they have also been bitterly criticized for their work.
Well, that's absolutely natural. I mean, if TIB wouldn't have been criticized, I would be really concerned about it, because that would mean that they are not doing their job as they should.
Okay.
I mean, we are not on a beauty contest in order to be nice for everybody. Okay. And of course, we understand that when we point someone and say, you are doing wrong, you are not performing well, you are lacking political will to change your corrupt environment, there's going to be a negative reaction. That's part of our position as civil society, and when you make a critic, you always expect a negative response to that. But that means that we are doing our job, and that we are pointing the correct things in order to generate a better environment against corruption. So I think that people engagement, that is one of our priorities on our 2020 strategy as an international movement, has already been implemented here in Bangladesh through our chapter, and we are very happy and proud about that.
In this current visit, what were your purpose, and whom did you meet?
Well, the main reason I am here is to celebrate the 20th anniversary of TI Bangladesh. It's a chapter that has been with TI almost since the beginning, and it's a very strong chapter, and we are very proud about them. So I came on behalf of the international movement to say we are with you and we are proud about you. Please continue doing your great work.
Yeah, please continue.
Taking advantage of this visit, then I have had several meetings with the stakeholders and the donors and the staff. I'm coming right now from a meeting with the anti-corruption agency chief, and I think it was a very productive one.
Okay. Now, about the Anti-Corruption Commission in Bangladesh, they have been doing some work, but did you have any impression from the Transparency International Bangladesh about the institutions which have been functioning to contain corruption or curb corruption in Bangladesh, limit corruption in Bangladesh, how effective they are working for that purpose?
Well, I would say basically this is a discussion to be held among Bangladeshis. I'm coming from abroad, so I'm not on the day-to-day life to make an accurate comment on this. But of course, if we see the international measures, and one of them is the Corruption Perception Index, the situation of Bangladesh is not good. I mean, and I've talked in these hours that I've been here in the country with several actors, and everybody is in consensus that there is too much corruption in the country. And it is systemic, it is not episodic. So I would say that more radical things need to be done, and that the political will of the authorities need to be there in order to make the change possible. And this is on favor of the people. This is not a political issue. Corruption has no ideology. You see governments that are coming from the left, like in Brazil, are tainted of corruption and now investigated. Chavez in Venezuela. Governments that are coming from the right and people that represent ideologies from the right, like Mr. Trump, is also involved in allegedly corruption. So corruption, one of the big researchers on this issue says corruption is like AIDS. It doesn't distinguish age, status, gender, ideology. It's there. It affects everybody. And we need to struggle against corruption if we want to struggle against poverty and to work in favor of development.
Do you have the sense after meeting people in Bangladesh that the government, the authority have good degree of goodwill to check corruption or limiting corruption?
Well, from the meeting I just have with the Anti-Corruption Agency, the Anti-Corruption Commission, I see that there's a will from this institution in order to address corruption. But as I mentioned, it is not the task of one person or one agency. This concerns to all, authorities and civil society. And of course, as much as political will is put in this fight, it would be better. And there's always a space to improve. So my message to the government and the authorities is please deploy your best efforts in order to eradicate corruption that is affecting the people of Bangladesh.
Also, at the end, going back to your vision, your vision, one global movement sharing one vision, that is creating a world in which government, business, civil society, and the daily lives of people are free of corruption. Is that a distant dream or becoming a reality nowadays?
It's a dream, but it is possible. One of our phrases we are constantly using now is together against corruption. We believe that this is a struggle, this is an effort that has to be done by the society, the entire society. It is not possible to address corruption and grand corruption, that's the type of corruption we're confronting nowadays, without a comprehensive approach. And this implies that authorities, civil society, private sector need to get together, put aside our differences, ideological differences, positions, etc., in order to address a problem that has been appointed by the authorities around the world as one of the worst problems of the current civilization.
Last question, what memories you are taking back Berlin to Peru?
Well, in general, I would say it's a very nice country, very impressive. And on a specific issue of anti-corruption, I take in the experience of our chapter. Yesterday, I had a very interesting meeting where the actions that TI Bangladesh is taking were explained to me, and I think that, as I mentioned to them, my idea is to export a Bangladeshi product. That is the way our chapter is dealing with corruption in this country.
Thank you so much,
Thank you.
Jose Ugas, for
Nice to
joining
meet
me
you.
on Frankly Speaking. Dear viewers, that's all my conversation with Chair Transparency International, Mr. Jose Ugas. And thank you very much for watching this show. And we invite you to watch our next episode. Until then, do take care. Goodbye.